Hello and welcome to another instalment of Drinks Galore's Meet the Maker series. I'm in London's Covent Garden at the spiritual home of agave spirits, El Nivel, to talk to one of the nicest people in the industry, Jesse Estes, a well-known and well-regarded bartender in his own right, a commentator and a writer on spirits of all kinds, but a person with a personal preference and a connection to tequila and mezcal, which I think you'll find interesting and exciting. Jesse, it's really good to spend some time with you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Mark.
Well, we're sitting in your absolutely fantastic bar here. Before we crack into talking about what tequila is, I wanted to ask you about your own personal experience.
Well, my own personal experience with tequila started, well, I'm told, because I don't actually remember this, started as a baby, teething, and actually having tequila rubbed on my gums, so that would probably explain why I don't have those early memories of my tequila experiences. But my connection to tequila is through my father, who is has the kind of very interesting title of Tequila Ambassador for Europe, given to him by the CNIT, which is the National Tequila Chamber in Mexico. So a big award for him, or honor, in recognition of his promotion, his work promoting tequila over the last 40 years. So I basically grew up with tequila.
So there was never a time when you could ever say you weren't a fan of tequila?
No, there's never. I've gone through different phases. So I do, I do enjoy other spirits, but very much, if we can make the analogy, tequila is my wife, and then I have some other mistresses.
I like that. So occasionally you cheat, but you're loyal in the end.
I am faithful to tequila, definitely.
I want to ask about in depth about what tequila is, because I think it's one of these spirits that, for the most part, people misunderstand or are often misled sometimes, and I've had some interesting experiences with it. But first, I wanted to ask, why do you think it is the most misunderstood spirit?
I think it's one of the most important points about tequila is the fact that it is so misunderstood. So there's two reasons that I see. One, until very recently, there weren't really stringent regulations in place around tequila. So we're talking about 20 years that the CRT has been in place, the Tequila Regulatory Council. And before that, there was a lot of, this is my opinion, I'm not stating a fact, but I think there was a lot of stuff that was less good quality that was making it out into export markets, mainly the US, which is the biggest consumer of tequila, bigger than Mexico. And because it wasn't regulated, there was stuff that was poorly made, the producers were cutting corners, and the result is something that gave us headaches, hangovers. I mean, we've all heard that story. So now we see a much more intense focus on quality control. We see the overall quality going up. We'll talk a little bit about the different types of tequila, but we're seeing a rise in 100% agave tequila, which is, I'm not going to say it's a better tequila than regular tequila, but it certainly, in my opinion, has a focus on quality. For instance, it can only be bottled in Mexico, whereas regular tequila can be shipped out in bulk and bottled anywhere in the US.
I think people would find that very interesting. So you mean to tell me that there are tequilas that people might have tried before, might have tried them in various ways, that are not wholly created in Mexico?
Well, yes, it's complicated. They are wholly created there, at least by law they have to be, but they can be exported in bulk and bottled out of Mexico. Okay. I'll show you something on these bottles here. So we've got a nice lineup of different tequilas here. We can grab Ocho. We'll be talking about Ocho, but this is our brand of tequila, so our family's brand of tequila. And what you really want to look for is whether it says 100% agave, and it can be different permutations of that phrase. This one says 100% puro de agave, so in Spanish, 100% pure agave. As long as it says 100% agave, again in English or Spanish on the bottle, you're assured that 100% of the sugars used to make this bottle of tequila are from the blue agave plant.
I'm going to have to pull you back there because there's so much stuff that's interesting within that. But blue agave, even agave, I think is going to be almost jargon to a lot of people. It certainly was to me until recently. Tell me about how tequila is made.
We have to talk a lot about the agave if we're going to talk about tequila, obviously. In this bottle, the one in front of us, there's only 2 ingredients: blue agave and water. So we're really talking about something that's incredibly, a flavor profile that's incredibly led by the plant itself. Of course, yeast, as we'll see, plays an important part in the production and the taste, but really what we're talking about here is the plant itself. And unlike grapes, for example, where you just pick the fruit but the vines stay, or wheat or grain that have relatively short growth cycles, we're talking about an average of 8 years in the soil under the hot Mexican sun, and then the whole plant is harvested. So it's not like we're taking the fruit off of a plant, it's actually the whole thing. So you're asking me, what is tequila? How is tequila made? We also like to say, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but actually, in a way, quite literally, that tequila is distilled sunshine. So
it is unique in terms of it's not like pulling wheat or barley and so on as is made for whiskey. So you have the plant; it's in the ground, as you say, for 8 years. Distilled sunshine, which I like. I know some people watching will have had some interesting experience with tequila. It might not have felt like sunshine at the time, but we'll talk about maybe why that was in a minute. What happens next?
So the next step of the process, basically, the plant kind of takes care of itself. You don't water it. What we do, and a lot of producers do, is tend to the field. So take the weeds out. Just make sure that the plants have enough room to grow. And also just to let you know what the plant looks like. So they're big kind of spiky-leaved succulents. So kind of like an aloe plant or a yucca plant. And we're talking about probably about between 1.5 meters and
okay.
1.5 meters probably. With other varieties, you see it go up to 2 or even 3 meters. But blue agave, so the only variety of agave allowed by law to be used to make tequila, we're looking at about 1.5 meters high with the spikes. So the harvesters cut off the leaves, and what you're left with is kind of a big, they call it a piña, a pineapple, because it kind of looks like the base of a pineapple. So if you can picture the leaves on the top of the pineapple cutting, but all around the pineapple, cutting those off, and then you're left with this kind of heart. At that point, you can taste it at that point, but it's very hard. So it's kind of like taking a bite out of a potato. And actually, it'll give you a rash because this plant is so good at protecting itself that if you look at it under a microscope, there's actually little microscopic needles. So you're actually, if you rub it on your skin, uncooked,
incredible,
or eat it, you'll get a little rash. Nothing serious.
It's trying to defend itself.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's an incredibly resilient plant, 12 plus million years old.
So it takes a real determination to want to make a spirit from it.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of patience. We're talking about, again, at least 5-6 years, waiting for it to grow. Harvest it. The pineapples, the agave hearts, are taken back to the distillery, usually cut in half or quartered, depending on the producer's style. Then they're either cooked in stone brick ovens or cooked in big pressure cookers, stainless steel pressure cookers that we call autoclaves. Those are the two. There's other ways to produce it, but to keep it simple, those are the 2 ways to cook it. So what we're essentially doing is converting those fructans into, again, a very specific type of fructose that many scientists believe is a healthier form of sugar than most others. That's why if you go to like a health food shop, you can find agave nectar there. You can use it on your porridge. You can use it however you want.
I love it in my cocktails.
In cocktails, even better. That's probably the best use for it. So now we've got fermentable sugars, but we need to squeeze this, again, let's call it the pineapple. We've got to squeeze all this juice out of the pineapple. So the most traditional or kind of rustic way to do that is using a tahona. A tahona is a giant, almost if you can picture like a tractor wheel, okay. Big tractor wheel made out of volcanic stone. the whole thing, so incredibly heavy. And then picture a round pit in which we're going to put all of the cooked agaves.
And that's still the method that's used?
It's still a method that's used. There's about between 5 and 10 brands that still use it. So, for example, Siete Leguas, which is on the back bar over here, uses a blend of 100% Tahona tequila and roller mill tequila, which is the more contemporary method of milling. And it's basically like a sugarcane mill. So you put the agaves, cooked agaves in it, and it squeezes it, and it also strips, because it's a very fibrous plant, so it strips the fibers and rinses them. So here we're seeing the first addition of a second ingredient, which is water, which is, of course, in all spirits is very, very important to have good, clean water. So that'll go in at this point. Now, fermentation, most producers have cultivated yeast strains that they'll add at this point into these sugars that are ready to ferment. And obviously, as you know, the yeast will eat the sugars and create alcohol, carbon dioxide, and heat through the process. So fermentation can last anywhere from 12 hours to, I mean, for Ocho, it's quite a long fermentation. It's about 5 days.
And that's for taste?
We do it because this is the most traditional way.
Okay.
This is the way that our producer, Carlos Camarena, has done it his whole life, his father, his grandfather, and so on. So we want to keep that tradition. But there's also a lot of flavors being created at this point in time. So yeasts, depending on what kind of interaction takes place, and we do, in large part, a natural fermentation. So we have open air, open windows, and yeast will just come from the environment, the local environment, and add their flavors into the mix, into the must.
Yes, okay, I like that. That will alarm quite a lot of people, I guess, when you know, who don't perhaps know how kind of brewing and distilling takes place, or perhaps have seen a whiskey distillery where obviously these things are quite an enclosed environment often. But you mentioned it adds taste and perhaps character to the spirit.
Yeah, it's gonna. I mean, the thing is, if we wanted to really control and have perfect consistency every time, we would have to have an incredibly controlled environment. Trying to have as little variability in flavor from one batch to the next as possible. With Ocho, we already know that that's not going to happen, because we'll get into this more, but one of the things we're doing is we're doing single field tequilas. So every year, we put the name of the field on the front of the neck, and then the year that we harvested on the back. So this is this year's, or last year's now, I guess it's 2015. So we know that every batch anyway is going to be slightly different. So we don't try and exert that much control over the process.
So you've got the yeasts doing their thing, and you know, what next? Is it much the same as a standard distillation process after that?
Pretty much. I mean, you're looking at once fermentation is finished, you're looking at a must that's about 4 to 6% alcohol by volume. So you're kind of like an agave beer.
And what would it taste like at that stage?
Be quite, depending on the producer. Ocho is quite vinegary. So it's not something that is especially pleasant, because there's no sugar left. So it's all been converted to alcohol. So there's no sweetness left.
Okay.
Whereas the agua miel, before fermentation, what we call the honey water, is very sweet. It's similar to tasting agave nectar, which is kind of like honey, very pleasant. But no, I wouldn't. The fermented agua miel is less tasty.
They say in whiskey distilleries they're guaranteed no one's going to steal the brewer's beer before time, because even a hardened alcoholic won't want to taste that.
Right. So definitely the same case here. Yeah. So very similar, as you said. We take that must and do one fermentation, which the result is called ordinario. And in most cases, that'll come off the still at about 21 to 26% alcohol by volume. So that's not called tequila yet by law. Tequila is twice distilled minimum by law. So second distillation goes back into the still, and then at that point, distillers can distill from anywhere, commonly from 40 to 55% is the common range. So tequila has to be bottled legally between 35 and 55% ABV.
And at what stage do you put the worm in?
So the worm in tequila, which is I think a question that I get a lot, you probably get a lot. First of all, the worm is in mezcal, which we'll get to. So kind of like what I like to think of as tequila's older brother.
Yeah. Scarier older brother.
Well, he could be. Yeah, he could
bigger.
be bigger. Yeah, kind of bigger, rougher.
Yeah,
rough around the edges.
A bit of life.
If tequila has a worm in it, you should really stay away from it.
So tell me about this, because I think for the most part, for years and years and years, I thought all tequila had to have a Mexican sombrero hat on top of the bottle, and it had a worm in it. And if it didn't have that, it wasn't quality. And I was amazed to find out that that's entirely the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, so this is my thing with the worm. People ask me how the worm started, and I have my own personal story why I think it started, and that very much has to do with alcoholic proof. And one way to do that is if you put something in there, in the liquid, and it conserves it, you know that it's a certain ABV. So the worm is actually not even a worm. The worm is called a gusano. It's a moth larva.
That sounds even tastier.
Yeah. And so my whole thing is that if you put it in spirit that was, let's say, at least 40+%, it would keep it, as opposed to maybe 25, 30%, it might start to disintegrate. Back in the day, and actually still now, a lot of indigenous Mexican population or Mesoamerican population don't read or write. So you'd have bottles or clay jugs or anything with this liquid in it, but it didn't say, it didn't say mezcal 45% like we get on our bottles now. So I think that was a good point of reference for them to know how strong, or to know that it was at least a certain percentage. And then I think it really turned into a gimmick. So it was, somebody, it's a good gimmick. Yeah. So, the whole, I think in the kind of 50s, 60s, 70s, it was, you passed around, you sat drinking a bottle of mezcal, passed it around until the end, and then the last person had to eat the worm, and it was like this whole ritual. But, I quite like that. What I don't like is putting the worm inside the liquid, and if you think of any infusion you make in neutral spirit or in tequila, any spirit you can infuse with vanilla or cinnamon or cardamom, whatever you want. But think about what happens if you put anything into a high proof or any spirit above 40%. It takes on the flavor of whatever you put in there. Yeah, so if you take a great mezcal, put a worm in there, after a few weeks, it's just going to taste like worm.
Tastes like worm, yeah. And that doesn't sound very appealing at all. I'm delighted to see that all the products you have on your bar here have no worm in them, or at least I've not come across one yet.
No, we should actually get some just to show people, but we don't have any.
One of the other traditions of tequila, I think that most people are familiar with, is the idea of shots.
Yes.
In fact, I think most people would probably say their experience of tequila is exclusively of shots towards the end of the evening. What do you think about shooting tequila?
I've shot tequila. I've had many shots of tequila, so I've got nothing against it except for, and if the atmosphere is right, if it's a party and you're just having some shots and you're feeling in that mood, then I think it's absolutely great. What I think is a shame is taking good tequila and only looking at it as a shooter. Because what happens with our taste buds is we've got sweet in the front of our tongue, the taste buds, and then we've got bitter right in the back. So what happens when you, obviously this is not a shot glass, but we'll suspend our disbelief and pretend this is a shot glass. What happens when you knock that back and down the hatch is you're left with that bitterness. Whereas if you take a sip, let it coat your whole palate, you're going to get a much greater breadth of experience, of flavor, depth of flavor, because you're letting it interact with your entire palate.
You must have seen, maybe not here necessarily, but you must be tired of hearing people say they don't like tequila.
I'm not tired of it at all. To me, it's a great, not even challenge, it's a great invitation to let them experience something new.
And I asked you that question deliberately because I love that question with all sorts of spirits, whiskies and others. But there's nothing quite like someone saying, oh, I don't like tequila. When did last have tequila? Oh, I had shots of it. So when? Oh, at the end of the evening. Yeah. So well, have you ever shot whiskey before? You would shoot gin at the end of the evening. Yeah, right. But it has that place, doesn't it? That I think in people's hearts that's the way that you taste tequila. So are you on a mission to convert people?
I am definitely, on some kind of mission, whatever you want to call it, just to introduce people to a new way of experiencing tequila. And if they don't like it, that's all I can do. But at least to show them a different way of doing it.
So I want to dive into something which I found fascinating, is that, of course, tequila isn't just this clear spirit that we see just now. That's only one of the kind of variations of tequila that you can get. Tell me a little bit more about the different types of tequila, I guess.
So we already talked about two, what they call categories. So the CRT is the one that puts all these laws into place. So they've created two categories of tequila, one being regular tequila, what some people call mixed or mixto tequila, which is 51% minimum agave sugars, and 49% other sugars, so usually sugarcane. The other category is 100% agave, so we know that all the sugars used in the fermentation are from the blue agave. Next, they've created 5 classes, what they call classes. So we've got Blanco, which is either unaged or aged up to 60 days. Okay. We've got the Herradura Plata. Plata is the same as Blanco, just a different, so you can call it silver, Blanco, Plata, it's all the same thing.
Same thing, okay.
All the same thing. And this is actually aged 45 days. So we can see there's a little light, kind of pale straw color to it. And again, that's just the decision of the producer, how they want to do it.
When you're talking about aged, we're talking about in oak barrels?
Blanco and Reposado can be any type of wood, any size. And when I say any size, they have, I can't even call them barrels, they're like vats. In some cases, they have 20,000 liter vats that are used for aging Reposados. Now, Reposado is 60 days minimum, and it can go upwards as far as you want, although most producers, when they hit 12 months, they'll call it an añejo, which is the minimum, legal minimum for an añejo is 12 months.
Those two words mean, you said reposado and añejo. Yeah. What do those translate to?
Reposado means rested. So Blanco, white, Reposado, rested. Añejo is basically just means a year or a year aged. And then we've got extra añejo, which is 3 years or more, which is a fairly recent category within the last 10 years or so.
In Mexico, would people drink añejo and extra añejo?
Not so much. The most popular category in Mexico is Reposado.
Ah,
yeah.
Okay. I thought you were going to say Blanco. That's interesting.
No, you know what? I would think Blanco too. For some reason, I actually don't know why I would think that, but no, it's Reposado is the kind of most popular category there. Okay.
And then mezcal. It's always mentioned in a similar breath to tequila, but it's not the same as tequila, and I think that's one of the great areas of misunderstanding, perhaps, and I'm still trying to fathom my way around that.
Mezcal is, to me personally, and having worked with other spirits categories and learned a lot about other spirits categories, to me, mezcal is the most complex spirit category out there. So there's two main differences with tequila. One, instead of just using one variety of agave, it's opened up to almost any variety in Mexico, indigenous to the 8 states that produce mezcal. Besides that, the second big difference is that you find a big hit of smoke on most mezcals, at least most Oaxacan mezcals from the state of Oaxaca. And the reason for that is instead of cooking above ground in steam ovens like we use for tequila, they tend to, and not all producers do this, but the traditional way of producing the mezcal is in big underground ovens, basically big pits where they start a big fire. They put rocks on top of the fire to create embers, so it's almost like a barbecue. Yes. Agaves go on top of the hot embers, and they actually get buried underground. And they can be buried for anywhere from a few days to a few weeks.
And the embers still are...
Yeah, you can walk up to the mound, big mound of dirt, put your hand on it, it's warm. Incredible. If you go around to, within the tequila community, tequila industry, and go to producers and say, why do you do this? They can usually tell you, most of them will say, well, we do this because this, this, and this, and they talk about Brix levels, and they talk about ABVs, and they can tell you why they do things. If you ask the same question to a mezcal producer, oh, because my father did it, his grandfather did it, or if his father did it, so on and so forth. And they're actually very spiritual people, and there's a real spirituality involved with production process. And something that astounds me every time is that these guys have learned to do this, just handed down father to son, this tradition, and yet they have these bamboo sticks, and they suck up the distillate, the finished mezcal, and let it drop into what they call a jicara, which is made out of like a dried gourd, like a dried squash or something, just like a cup, a little bowl. And they can tell by the size and amount of the bubbles in that jicara, they can tell the ABV and the level of purity. And most producers I know can tell within 0.5% ABV, because we test it afterwards for fun. Yeah. But they're incredibly accurate.
Is there any truth to the story I heard that some mezcals have chickens hanging in these ovens?
Yes. So again, going back to this incredible amount of complexity, and there's so many different expressions of mezcal. I mean, what we have here is really only the tip of the iceberg, and we try and represent the category as best possible, but it's incredibly varied. So pechuga is the name of, pechuga, which means like breast, like chicken breast, is the name of that process. And it's very traditional, especially in certain areas of Oaxaca, to use this process in a third distillation, often in, well, it could be in copper, but very often in clay pot stills, very small clay pot stills. And they put, in this third distillation, they put dried fruits and nuts and stuff. So almost like a gin in that sense. Sure. So macerate it in the spirit and redistill it with the spirit, as well as hanging a chicken breast in the neck of the still.
Cooked chicken? Or?
It's raw chicken, but it'll cook, the vapor will actually cook this chicken breast. And again, why do they do that? It's because at some point it was, who knows? I don't know. But that's the wonder of mezcal. It's very spiritual, traditional. And now they're using stuff like not just chickens, they're using rabbits, venison.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's great. I love the
so it's not necessarily a vegetarian spirit, that one.
No, that one, veggies should steer clear of pechuga, definitely.
Jesse, off the top of your head, how many tequilas have you got on your back bar?
Here at El Nivel, we try and keep the selection smaller, but almost everything we have is either very unique, different, not available in the UK, etc. So we try and do something a bit different here. I think we've got about between 120, 130 tequilas here, and about 45, 50 mezcals.
So it could be said that the market for tequila is broad, and there was an awful lot of them. So I'm really intrigued as to what made you guys sort of feel, I guess, there was a space for this product here, which is Ocho, which is your family brand.
So my father, besides working with tequila and Mexican products for almost 40 years now, he started his first Mexican restaurant 39 years ago. So he's always had this passion for Mexican food, Mexican drinks, but he also lived in France for about 16 or so years. And every year, living not too far from Burgundy, he'd go to the en primeur tasting. So before the vintage was actually released, you go taste it out of the barrel. And he became fascinated with this concept of terroir. That's, I think, must be as apparent in Burgundy or more as anything in the world. This concept of the earth and the natural elements playing such an important part in the final wine that you're going to drink. The grapes, of course, and then the wine by extension. So he had the idea, partnering up with Carlos Camarena. I mean, for us, Carlos is the best. So we were very lucky to be working with him on this project. But we said to him, could you do, because him and his family own about 48 different fields, different plots of land. So we said, could you do single field tequila?
Yes.
And Carlos thought about it, just a few instances, said, yes, we can do that. But be careful, Tomas, be careful. Because each batch that you do from different fields will taste a little bit different. And we said that's exactly what we're looking for. So we're not looking for we're not looking for consistency of character, so not to be the same every time, year after year, which, by the way, for tequila is almost impossible. But we're looking for complexity of character. So you want, this year it was really peppery, really earthy, really mineral, with some kind of light tropical fruits. And this new one is much more kind of in your face, a little bit rougher, but heaps of fruit, but maybe more stone fruit. So we like that kind of experimentation and not conforming and doing something different.
It feels like it's at the right time in the market. I'm starting to see, a wider range of tequilas on back bars, and I think a lot of people are asking, more about tequila. I think certainly turning over that stone from they remember university and waking up with a terrible hangover and thinking, I'll never go back to it, and then in years later thinking maybe it's time. A lot of people won't drink tequila neat. But they'll enjoy it in a cocktail. Obviously, there's the kind of classic cocktails, margaritas, and so on. What is your favorite, or maybe a good recommendation of a tequila cocktail people could ask a bar for or try and make at home?
Well, like you said, for me, a margarita, specifically a Tommy's margarita, which, as you mentioned before, is sweetened with agave nectar. So quite a, relatively speaking, healthy drink, healthy cocktail. If you can have a healthy cocktail, I would say Tommy's is healthy. So for me, that's a great go-to drink. There's one cocktail that I make to anybody that says that they don't like tequila. I say, I'll make you a cocktail. If you don't like it, I'll drink it, I'll throw it away, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I'll make you whatever you want after that, if you don't like it. And what I do to make that is based on a cocktail called the Marquis, which was bourbon-based originally. So I do tequila, fresh lime, Chambord, which is a black raspberry liqueur, a touch of agave nectar, cranberry juice, fresh raspberries, egg white, and the result is you can serve it long, you can serve it straight up, you can serve it on the rocks, however you want. And I've never had a single person turn it back. So that's been a great way to, there's tequila in this? No, there's not. This is not tequila as a base. And I make sure to put a healthy serving of tequila. So it's you can feel the tequila in there.
It may be someone's gateway tequila moment.
I hope so. I certainly hope so, yeah.
Jesse, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I'm going to raise a toast. Thank you very much indeed for your time and your wisdom. Here's to Ocho, the future of tequila, and many more opportunities to chat.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you.